Part 1.
Good afternoon. Thank you for coming to this public meeting which has been called to discuss the idea of creating a nature reserve in the city. That is, an area where wildlife is protected. And to begin with, local teenager Tricia Simpkins is going to tell us some of the background to the idea. Tricia.
Yes, hello. I'd like to start by saying that, like many city teenagers, I don't have much contact with the countryside. I live off a busy, polluted shopping street, full of people and cars in the middle of a crowded city, and I'd never given any thought to wildlife. Even though every house down my street has got a bit of a garden, and we have trees along the road and a piece of waste ground at one end, it seemed nothing out of the ordinary, and I took it all for granted. My attitude started to change when we had to do a survey of the wildlife in the city as part of a school project. We chose 10 families from the street and we asked them just to write down all the animals, birds, insects and so on that they could remember seeing in their garden or down the street during the last couple of years. All sorts of surprising things soon started coming out of that survey, like that we have 20 different sorts of butterfly, 50 different types of birds and all sorts of animals, even some quite large ones like foxes and deer. At first we wondered what it meant, like, was it a world record or something? We'd no way of knowing. So what we did, we got in touch with a nature reserve out in the country and asked them what you could see there. And that's when we realised that we've as much, if not more, wildlife than they do. And that's what really got us interested in the idea of a nature reserve here. Because what worries us now is that we may be losing our local wildlife. One specially worrying thing has been all the cutting down of trees in the streets. We've got really big old trees here in this part of the city, and of course if one gets damaged in a storm or gets a disease, it has to be removed. But this year alone, over 100 of these trees have been chopped down. Now, the reason given for this is that the trees have really extensive root systems, which makes it difficult for people laying gas pipes, electricity cables and things. But we think these problems are not as serious as they are made out to be, and there's no need for all this destruction. What's more, although the local council has agreed to plant new trees in place of the old ones, what they're planting are these little ornamental trees that look nice, but the birds and animals just don't use them in the same way. And they're not even saving money because more suitable trees cost just the same. Another example of what can happen is the wasteland at the end of our street. It belongs to the city council, and as children we all used to play there and we thought it was really great because it was so covered in bushes and wild flowers that you could get lost if you went off the little muddy tracks. Then a few years ago, no doubt thinking they were doing the right thing, the council decided to tidy it up. And now it's just an area of grass where people go to exercise their dogs. There are a few little trees, but basically there's not a lot there anymore. So what I'd like to propose this afternoon is that we use this space to create a nature reserve. We think it should be allowed to go back to its natural condition, thus providing a refuge for the local wildlife which may be suffering from the loss of trees in the area. This would, of course, also be a leisure amenity for people who want to get away from the stresses of city living, which is hardly something we would want to deny them. So, I would like you...
Part 2.
And now a look at some of this evening's programmes on Radio Pearl. At 7:30 we have Art Review, a programme which has fast become a favourite among our listeners with its mix of in-depth reports on artistic events and revealing interviews with the artists who regularly come into the studio. Today we'll be going to London to the National Museum, which holds approximately 5 events a year, and this particular one is always popular because it features work by student artists. This year is no exception, as everything is the work of final-year art students from a local college. You'll be surprised at the variety of things you can see. Exhibits range from curtains to glasswork, and I understand there are a total of nearly 2,000 works on display. There is an excellent use of raw materials, and of course many exhibits demonstrate how industrial technology can be employed in art. If you want to buy any of the exhibits, it will cost you anything from £25 up to £2,000. So, for more information on what can be seen, where and for how much, tune in to Radio Pearl tonight at 7:30. Then at 8, there's another in our series of classic plays, and tonight it's The Vanishing Lady, starring Margaret Loudon. Briefly, two young people become caught up in a thrilling adventure when they're walking through a carriage on a train and suddenly hear a noise that sounds to them like a gun being fired. They rush into the next carriage, which is completely empty, with its doors swinging backwards and forwards. Then in the restaurant car, they ask the first person they meet, who happens to be a waiter, if he also heard the sound. No, he says, and goes on to tell them that an old lady is in the carriage. He just saw her going back in there. But when they return, of course, she's gone. Some say the lady never existed, but others are sure they saw her. Who's telling the truth, or is everyone on the train lying? Find out at 8 o'clock tonight. It's a brilliant play by Porton, and also his last before he moved on to writing for films. Finally, for those of you who like sailing, Business Scenes at 9:30 p.m. brings you The Unsinkable Boat, and a chance to meet its maker, Canadian businessman Peter Field. In 1995, Peter was a manager in a computer company, but he left that job to go on a world cruise. He had wanted a stress-free life, but ended up back in the rat race building boats. His new company has many products, including luxury boats costing from $1 to $2 million, which Peter claims will suffer no serious damage even if they hit an iceberg at full speed. It's all in the type of metal you use, as he explains tonight. And we also hear about Peter's unusual collection. You would think that a man in his line of work would collect model boats and ships, rather than the old maps, which are his real passion. If you tune in this evening, you'll find out how he started his collection and how he hunts for items to add to it. Well, back to this afternoon's programmes and a look at the...
Part 3.
In some sports, the players seem to be getting younger and younger. My guests today are 14-year-old Alice Winters and her coach, Bruce Gray. Alice, as national junior tennis champion, has been described as the most talented young player for years. Alice, Bruce, welcome.
Hello.
Hello.
Let's start by talking about money. Have you found it easy to get help in that respect, Bruce?
Not really. We've applied to local companies for sponsorship, but they would sooner put their money into something which gets them publicity. Alice isn't that well known yet, so we'll probably have to get there without it. And I reckon that with Alice's talent, there's no reason why we can't. That'd be an even greater achievement, wouldn't it?
Now, Alice, you must do a lot of training. Is it sometimes a bit too demanding for someone of your age?
Well, a lot of players my age might ask themselves, why can't I be like everyone else, free in the evenings and at weekends? But that side of it doesn't bother me. I must admit, though, that there are times when I just don't fancy it, freezing cold winter mornings when Bruce comes round to take me on a training run and I think, oh, go away and leave me alone. But apart from that, well, I do it because I enjoy it. Nobody's making me do it, are they? So I don't really see it as making sacrifices.
And what about your schoolwork?
Well, I'm managing to keep up with that at the moment, although I can see that if I do get more successful, the sport might get in the way of academic work. But, well, I know which comes first for me. After all, if I make it to the top in tennis, I won't need any academic qualifications.
Now, Alice, when you're competing in a tournament, is it all terribly serious, or do you have fun?
Well, I'm only there for one reason, really. I mean, I can't see the point otherwise. I'm not one of those people who think that taking part matters more than winning. I mean, I know I can't win every time, especially up against people a lot older than me, but that's always the aim. And if I lose, well, I look at my performance with Bruce, look at ways of improving it, and, well, I don't let it get to me. I'm just more determined next time.
Bruce, what do you think makes Alice different from other players of the same age?
I've never come across any young player quite like her in all my years as a coach.
Oh.
What amazes me is you can watch her play, and she doesn't seem to be trying, even though, of course, she is. With other players, you can see the effort involved, but with her, well, she's just so gifted.
So, Alice, how do you see your future?
Well, I'd love to turn professional, but it's a bit early to think seriously about that. I mean, I'm a big fish in a small pond at the moment, but as I get older, well, there are going to be a lot of tough players out there. If I do end up doing it full-time, the lifestyle looks glamorous from outside, but it might just be too hard for me and I might decide to get out. But it's hard to say. Some people stay at the top for years, don't they?
Bruce, do you and Alice get on well? Is she an easy person to coach?
You know, sometimes I find it difficult to remember how young she is, because she's got an old head on young shoulders. We've had the odd, shall I say, disagreement, but she doesn't have much of a temper. It soon passes. She doesn't have a great deal to say, I guess, when we're working or travelling to tournaments. She has friends outside the game, but she doesn't have much time for a social life at the moment.
Well, Alice and Bruce, thanks for being my guests and good luck for the future.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Part 4.
My job is model making. I make small copies of large buildings and other structures. It might seem a strange job, but I knew when I was at school that it was what I wanted to do. So I did a college course, not in art or architecture, as you might expect, but in woodwork. Because of the concentration on fine detail it requires, it was ideal for a model maker. Although later, of course, I had to adapt my skills to other materials as well. When I make a model of an old building, often original parts of the building have been damaged or even completely demolished over the years, so I have to work hard to find out what they must have been like. Actually, I think there's quite a lot in common between what I do and what a detective does, tracking down clues, working things out. I've done quite a few jobs now. The toughest commission I've ever had was from Ireland. I was asked to do a model of part of a large house which had burnt down years before. They just gave me a few old photos to use, as there was no actual building to copy. I've done all sorts of buildings since, everything from grand castles to the most ordinary farmhouse. The one I liked most, though, was where I had to rebuild a theatre. The original building was gone, but this time there were detailed drawings to work from. My model was then shown in an exhibition called All the World's a Stage here in London. It was fun because I could go and look at it every day if I wanted to, see how people were reacting to it. Generally, though, I don't see my models again after I've delivered them, as 80% of them are shipped out to Japan or Canada, with the rest shared between England and France. I do try to give pretty careful instructions, however, about how the models should be displayed. The height at which they should stand, how large the space around them should be, and also about lighting, because the colours and details come out most clearly if there's electric light directly above them. Daylight's too pale. And that's particularly true of my most recent project, a model of a very interesting old building called Marney House. The owners decided to open it to the public and wanted a model to display for visitors. The detail work was very challenging indeed, as I had to reduce the original to a model just 140 centimetres high, which is 76 times smaller than the real building. That's small, yet everything has to be there. It actually took longer than any model I've ever done before, mainly because I had to do all of the 150 windows, a real test of patience. There were times, to be honest, when I found myself regretting the fact that I'd ever taken the project on in the first place. On top of that, I had to make every single one of the thousands of roof tiles individually out of paper. Mind you, when I'd finished that process, I knew the hardest part was over and that the rest would be quite fun. Doing things like the statues along the front was enjoyable because everyone's different. And I spent some happy hours playing around with colours to get the exact reproduction of the original interior walls. When I'd finished all that, the only remaining problem was that, of course, the whole thing looked like a model of a new building. So I did what I usually do, which is to carefully wash the outside of the model with watercolour, so that it looks as if, over the years, it's been affected by wind and rain, and also pollution, of course. The owners were very pleased with the result, and I'm glad I can go and see it from time to time. Model making is a great job, and I'd recommend it to anyone with patience and an eye for detail.